Say tonight? That is the question everyone is asking about Jimmy Kimmel as he prepares to return to television. ABC sidelined the late night host last week after the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, appeared to threaten the licenses of stations who aired Kimmel. A huge backlash ensued from Democrats and some Republicans like Ted Cruz, along with actors and viewers who threatened to boycott or cancel subscriptions. And even criticism from the former head of Disney. So what ultimately pushed Bob Iger to return Kimmel to the air? And what will Donald Trump have to say or try to do in response? It is clear the drama is not over, as two of the country's largest station owners, Sinclair and Nexstar, say they will continue to preempt the show on all of their ABC stations. Joining us now, founding partner at Puck, Matthew Bellany. Matt, great to have you. So I'll ask you the question, what ultimately pushed Iger?
I think it was the tremendous backlash. And keep in mind, this was not supposed to be a permanent benching. They did run up against a time constraint when they were initially negotiating with Kimmel over what he would say on the air. Finally, they pulled the plug and said, we will punt this. Then the backlash came, and I think they pretty quickly realized that they had to get him back on the air. And this past weekend was a back and forth negotiation, not just on the terms of him coming back, but what he was going to say when he did come back.
Do we have an idea of what those negotiations sounded like, maybe what the contours were?
Well, there's only three people that were in there. Bob Iger, the CEO, Dana Walden, who runs the TV division, and Jimmy Kimmel himself. No reps in that conversation. But I did get a peek at what Kimmel was supposed to say, or what he wanted to say last week on the show. And it was not a full-throated apology. It was a clarification that there was a misunderstanding. He does not believe that the alleged shooter of Charlie Kirk was a MAGA person. He never believed that, he was going to say. And then he went a little further. He attacked the right-wing media on social media. He attacked Fox News by name. He did a couple of other things that went over the line in Disney's mind and crossed into the line of being insensitive. So the question now is, a week later, is he going to keep that stuff in his comments, or will he take some of that stuff out? And I think he will take a few of those things out and focus more on the misunderstanding and maybe some of the riled up backlash online.
What about Nexstar and Sinclair? They're going to continue to preempt Kimmel. Do we know if this is just to see what he says tonight? Any idea of how long that might last?
Well, interesting in the statement, especially from Sinclair, they said that they're going to be continuing to monitor the situation and they're going to continue to discuss the topic with Disney. So they sort of left themselves a path to come back if they want to. The same with Nexstar, where they said that, yeah, we're going to have ongoing discussions with ABC about this. So I think that was those two station groups saying, okay, we're going to monitor this, see what he says tonight, and if there is a path back, we think that we can work something out here. The thing that's hovering over all of this is that both those companies either have a deal pending or would like to do deals that will require the FCC approval.
They have that. They also have some risk of their own if they keep him off the air. Explain what they are risking if they continue to sideline or preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Well, these ABC deals with the affiliates have very specific language that they have to carry the content. They can opt out. There have been opt-outs in the past. When Ellen came out as gay, a lot of stations didn't air that. There have been risque movies that they haven't aired.
But those were single episodes or single moments, right?
Right. Those are single moments, and they deem them inappropriate for their station groups. But this is an ongoing boycott. And frankly, you could argue that there's some legal liability here if they do this based on the content. Now, that's a totally separate issue, but they choose to not air this, and their constituents ultimately may come to them and say, listen, we actually kind of like this. Or what are you doing here? My friends are all talking about this Jimmy Kimmel episode. I wasn't able to watch it. Why?
All right, Matt Bellany, really good to have you. Thank you so much. We're going to be watching tonight.